Maybe we can start with the causes of this crisis, because I think that is very much related to the prescriptions that are on the menu today. Now, there's a new conventional wisdom that's formed over the last 6 months, blaming markets for financial and economic crisis. And as you said, the answer is bigger government, much more comprehensive regulation, financial markets and beyond. Now, I think that diagnosis is fundamentally wrong. Sure, markets have failed in financial markets, not generally, because they've been overwhelmed with all kinds of exotic instruments. But there has been very serious government failure as well. So we've had very serious policy mistakes of over-regulation that have really materially caused this crisis in the US housing market, with US monetary policy, with insane fiscal policies in the United States under the Bush administration, and also with problems in China, oversaving, underconsumption, which have fed into the bubble of assets and prices in the United States. Without all of that, we wouldn't have seen the kind of destructive consequences we've seen in financial markets. So we've got to recognize the cause to begin with, which is government failure at least as much as market failure. That raises the question, what response should there be to this crisis? The conventional response is that governments need to really boost aggregate demand to avoid a 1930s style depression. First point, we are not back to a 1930s style depression. This is a very severe recession, perhaps the worst since the Second World War. We'll wait and see. But it's by no means as bad as the depression of the 1930s. Now, the argument is that you've got to go beyond monetary policy easing to expansionary fiscal policy through a combination of tax cuts and expenditure increases. Now, I'm in the minority who thinks that this is the wrong way to do it. What's much more important is to fix the banking system and to get credit and trade finance flowing again. It's also important to undertake all kinds of supply-side reforms to make markets more supple, more flexible, so that we can have a healthy rebound. But fiscal stimulus, for me, in general, is not the answer for a whole variety of reasons. It's partly to do with the economics, it's a lot to do with the politics.
Yeah, this is heavy technical stuff. I want you to simplify what you meant by monetary stimulus you spoke about earlier and get the financial markets going. And you talked about supply, freeing up supply, to create supply responses. So could you kind of explain a little bit?
Sure.
Yeah.
The immediate problem, bigger than all other problems, is that there has been a financial market meltdown and there's no credit in the economy. And that also applies to trade finance. We have to have the fixing of the banking problem. So far, we've seen ad hoc piecemeal measures that have only added to instability, uncertainty, volatility in markets. Banks around the world, starting with the United States and Western Europe, have to be recapitalized. And governments should focus very much on recapitalizing banks, taking out the bad assets, and getting them lending again.
But Razin, didn't Paulson try it with the $700 billion bailout package and cleaning out the toxic assets and all that, and not just in the U.S. but everywhere else?
Not really. This was very much an ad hoc throwing the kitchen sink at the problem response. He thought it was a liquidity problem, that banks simply didn't have enough money to lend. The real problem is that many of these banks are practically insolvent. So they have to be cleaned up, and that requires a more dramatic response on the part of government. There are lots of proposals on the table. The main thing is that there's got to be serious thinking about it, and then very clear-cut action to send the right signals to markets. Unfortunately, among other problems, these fiscal stimulus packages have crowded out serious thinking and serious action about how to deal with the banking problem.
So what you're saying is that the solution being offered is for some other ailment and not the ailment that we currently.
I think that's partly the case.
The stimulus packages, both in the U.S. and elsewhere, there are sort of nationalist thinking. Now the American program has Buy American and sort of creeping protectionist policies, as you've been writing. How is that whole thing impacting on global trade and also looking at the world coming out of the crisis, not just beggar thy neighbor type policies?
Well, I think there's a direct relationship between these fiscal stimulus packages and emerging protectionism. In other words, big government at home is spilling over into protectionism abroad, and often it's wound up in one and the same package. The American stimulus package is a good example, or a bad example to begin with. We have an $800 billion package. It's a dog's breakfast of expenditure increases to cater to all kinds of special interest groups. I don't think it's going to do the job. And embedded in the package are two protectionist devices. One is to discriminate against foreign suppliers for government procurement in the United States in certain areas. And the other is to make sure that banks that get government money don't employ foreign workers. So you see a direct link between the two. Now, under cover of these fiscal stimulus packages, especially through increased public spending, we are seeing all kinds of distortions introduced into national economies, mainly subsidies given out to all kinds of uncompetitive firms, and the queue is becoming longer and longer. And then it's the next step for these very firms to say, we want protection against foreign competition. So then you have a translation effect. It's been happening not just with the Buy American provisions. We have a backlash against foreign workers and migrant labor in the United States, in the European Union, and also in lots of developing countries with labor from other developing countries. We have subsidies that are turning into export subsidies, discriminating against foreign firms. We have banks being told through nods and winks not to lend abroad, but to concentrate lending at home. We have restrictions on foreign direct investment that are on the rise. We have the Chinese accused of currency manipulation and of accumulating bilateral trade deficits. So on all these fronts, and I can mention others besides, mainly through non-tariff barriers rather than tariffs, we're seeing an increase in protectionism as one of the responses to this crisis. Now, the problem is this. This crisis means, among other things, that we're seeing a severe contraction in international trade. That is happening anyway, for the first time since 1982. We're seeing a contraction of foreign direct investment.
Right.
Remittances are going to shrink. As I mentioned before, there's a lack of trade finance. Now, the right response to all of this is to try and minimize the damage and position countries, that applies to Sri Lanka like everywhere else, to take advantage of the rebound when it comes, when we'll see a pickup in global trade, in global finance, in FDI,